I'm Nicola Tallant, and you can listen to my brand new podcast, Beast, The Murder of Nora Sheehan, streaming now, wherever you get your podcasts.
So tomorrow, Jozef Puska will be sentenced for the murder of Ashling Murphy. We already know what that sentence is going to be. He'll be given a life sentence because that's the automatic thing you get in Ireland. But 1 week on, his motivation is still really unclear about what has happened, and the level of shock after the verdict, it's still leaving people looking for answers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even though the verdict was over a week ago at this point, I mean, the story has still not gone away. There's been new stories every day sort of about Jozef Puska. We've heard about his past, and there's been a lot of speculation about why, and there's been this big question mark hanging over why. According to sources that I've heard, he's been telling a very different version of events to what he told on the stand while behind bars. Do have to obviously emphasise that is secondhand information that's coming to me, but he seems to be telling a different story, and seems to be indicating that the motivation may have been sexual. We can see from his past, I mean, stories have come out that he was actually a convicted sex offender in Slovakia.
Yeah, so I mean, since his conviction, we've heard more information, and there has been a criminal conviction in his homeland. This is back from when he was a teenager. It's effectively, there's going to be a different legal system, but it's effectively a statutory rape charge. The details of it, I think, have been that the girl was underage at the time, but it's described as a consensual sexual interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has been. And it seems like while convicted of that at the time, he only got probation. He's been living here in Ireland since about 2012, I believe. And we've heard that he was a suspect in an attack in Prague, in the Czech Republic. And it happened while he was living in Ireland. He was, I think, on visiting Prague. And there's another incident from another country, which I believe may have been the UK.
Yeah, so I mean, in these cases, he's described as a person of interest. I suppose what's the difference between a person of interest and a suspect? But I suppose a person of interest is kind of slightly less than a suspect in terms of he was not maybe arrested or formally questioned about these incidents. However, something marking his description, a man marking his description is believed to have carried out this sex attack in Prague. At the time, while he was resident in Ireland, he was living over there, or he'd been working as a labourer over there, and that he seems to be very clearly that he was in the frame for that, and also in the frame for an attack in the UK. So he's obviously not being convicted of these things. Nonetheless, we have also heard some stuff about his actions in Ireland. So I mean, I think quite scarily, Gardaí ultimately seized his electronic devices and found that he had been on dating sites. Obviously, he's a married man with 5 kids, but he had been on dating sites in the run-up to Ashling Murphy's death, which would also sort of throw an indication on what he was, what his motivation were on the day itself.
Yeah, what his motivation could be. I mean, I suppose, Gardaí basically, when they got their warrant to search his home, they were able to seize electronic devices, and from that's how they found out he was on different dating sites and posing as a single man, which of course isn't a crime in itself. But when you put it together with what happened to Ashling Murphy, it is likely that he was, looking for a victim. And there is this kind of whole question mark over, again, what was the actual motivation? And as well, I mean, from the point of view where we were a week ago, we were sitting here thinking, well, this is very out of nowhere. This is just something that's happened. But of course, with all these things, most of the time, violence against women doesn't start with a murder. It starts a lot earlier on. I mean, normally the psychology of a killer, it starts with animals or whatever it might be. But I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting to see anything like that in Jozef Puska's past. Maybe not, but it's definitely kind of putting more puzzle pieces together for us. Yeah,
because, there's obviously, we're talking about violence against women. A lot of the women that die in Ireland are killed by their partners, boyfriends or ex-boyfriends. Just totally random attack on women of the type that Ashling Murphy suffered a horrific attack from somebody not known to them at all in any circumstance, which in Jozef Puska, he had no contact with her before. They're quite uncommon.
Very uncommon.
And for somebody to do that at the age of 33, isn't he?
Yeah.
And to have never have done anything before would also be unusual, I think.
Very unusual, yeah. I mean, again, we're not psychologists, but you do see this kind of progress of killers when they do start out. They start out with maybe it's abuse or assault or whatever it might be, and do work up to that. And the same with then kind of, but for him to be 33 starting now, it is very unusual. I mean, you would see if something like that was to happen, that it may be progressing on into the future, but he's a very young killer.
Exactly. And I mean, certainly I think, was it the number I think you had in your own piece, Clodagh, was 240 something? Was it women killed since Women's Aid have begun? I can't remember the exact figure, but nearly the majority of them would have been from ex-partners.
Yeah, ex-partners, even their sons in some cases, but majority of the time it is a man known to the woman. Yeah,
and so people like, for Jozef Puska, the level of violence, of course, that he committed is just horrific. To stab somebody 11 times and in that manner, for just that to spring out of nothing is it is still quite unusual. We also had in the Sunday World how we spoke to his family, who they remain standing by him and proclaiming his innocence. However, tomorrow at the sentencing hearing, we will hear different things. We will hear from his defence. I can't imagine they're going to admit guilt or anything like that, but they may give some sort of extenuating circumstances or whatever. I don't know what excuse could possibly be given, but we probably also hear victim impact statements. We did obviously hear from Ashling Murphy's family the day of his conviction, but there will be a more detailed victim impact statement tomorrow.
Yeah, so the family will have their opportunity to read their impact or have it read to the court for them. It's an opportunity, I suppose, this whole time this trial has been about Jozef Puska and what he did, and we're kind of, now that we're at the end and we have a verdict, we can hear from Ashling's family and hear more about Ashling, and it will be their opportunity to tell the court about her and to kind of have that kind of read out into a public domain as well. It is expected that both Ashling Murphy's family and Jozef Puska's family will be there. But again, the prosecution will also sometimes, in these things, we hear information that we didn't hear throughout the trial comes into play during the sentencing, and particularly anything that was kind of a legal argument that may be kind of part of circumstances. Like, for example, the not saying that it will be mentioned, but it is a possibility that conviction in Slovakia might be mentioned as part of sentencing. But again, it is kind of a certain sentence that he has. There's no kind of discretion with that one. It is going to have to be a life sentence. Yeah,
so I mean, we've also heard about Jozef Puska, as you discussed, being in prison. I mean, he remains in protective custody. I think it's in Clover Hill, is it still?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, he probably wouldn't be mixing with the general population at this stage for his own safety.
Yeah.
And there's also discussion about him attempting to maybe get his service sentence in Slovakia, but that seems to have been something that people don't think is likely.
Yeah, I have seen that he might be looking to have a sentence served out there because the prisons might be a little bit, easier or less harsh than here, which I'd be interested to know what the prisons in Slovakia are like, if they're any easier than here. But I mean, he is currently in Clover Hill. After his sentence, it will be likely he'll be moved to possibly Mountjoy. I mean, at present, he is being kept kind of segregated away from the general population for his own safety, but also he's under suicide watch. We heard emerging last week that on the 31st, so Halloween night, the day before he was due to begin testifying in his own defence, there was what seemed to be a self-harm incident. We don't know the exact details of that. The next morning, the judge was given a sick note from Clover Hill, and Jozef Puska was told, if he wanted to present his defence, he had to make himself available to the court. So we were delayed by one day. The jury were told that there was a sick note. That's really all we heard, and that they were dismissed for the day, and then he came back. But it is likely when he goes into Mountjoy, he will have to be kept away from other prisoners.
So Jozef Puska, like a lot of people are saying, how long will he serve? I mean, I know we said this before. He will serve a life sentence, which could mean any amount of time. I can't remember the longest ever serving life sentence prisoner in Ireland, but people have served well over 30 years or more. There is no obligation on the state to let them out at any point. However, most people are let out if they show a degree of rehabilitation. I think the average is somewhere between 17 and 19 years for life sentence prisoners at this point. So somebody like Jozef Puska, you know, he's likely to serve, 20, 30 years in prison at a very minimum.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the example, I suppose the example I would have of a prisoner that's been in there for 50 years for a life sentence of murder is John Shaw, who was a spree killer, he could be described as, or a serial killer. And then you have the likes of Malcolm MacArthur, who was also killed 2 people, and he is now out of prison. He was apparently a model prisoner, and it does depend on that. I mean, the unfortunate thing about this is that when it does come around to Jozef Puska going before the parole board, it's going to be re-traumatising for the family, because they're going to have to go and plead their case once again.
Which of course they weren't allowed to for many years, but that the law has been changed to allow the family to have an input, which is probably a mixed blessing. Some families are very grateful to have that opportunity to say that people shouldn't get out, but it's always another point of trauma, of course, for the family, because no matter how long somebody serves in prison or how harsh and how difficult it is to be in prison, that person does at some point get a chance to get on with their lives.
Absolutely.
Ashling Murphy will never be afforded that opportunity. The family, I thought, were really moving on in what they said, and Ashling Murphy's boyfriend as well, who spoke, was very, really brings home the impact of these crimes, the never-ending impact of these crimes, I suppose.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, I mean, people, consume this as part of their news cycle or whatever it might be, but at the end of the day, there's still a family who had to sit through that trial and are going to have to kind of move on with their lives. We'll move on to different things. There'll be another trial in a few months' time that we'll move on to. But for the likes of Ashling's family, like, this is something that they're going to have to deal with for the rest of their lives. And I think that I don't know how they held it together so well. They were incredible, and so many people have praised them for their, for their poise and their grace, and how they spoke about Ashling and how they were even in the courtroom. That was such a strong move from Ashling's mother to hold up that photograph of her after the conviction. Yeah,
and of course Jozef Puska put them through a trial. I mean, there's cases this week and every week where people admit to crimes, and it means that a family doesn't have to go through that and listen to that and to worry about the final outcome. Like Jozef Puska made a decision to do that. He didn't have to. So, it's our sympathy is always with them. The other thing is, of course, it has become kind of a bit of the coverage of it on social media has got, that must also be difficult for the family, because it has become a bit of a political football in various ways. Certainly, certain people have jumped on it from an anti-immigration standpoint.
Yes, I've seen that majorly.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is he was an immigrant who come into this country. But statistically, Irish men and other people commit murders in no greater numbers. So I think we'll be there. You're going to attend tomorrow, and we can probably expect to do another podcast at that point.
Yes, we'll be back tomorrow to talk a little bit about, I suppose, what happens in court. It's the victim impact statement, and to kind of just reconvene and...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to see it to the end, and maybe hope to give the family a forum to express how they feel about Ashling. And it really is a very sad case. So thank you very much, Clodagh, and we'll be back tomorrow to discuss it.
Thank you, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.